How many superheroes can you name? I mean, certainly we know the main ones. Superman, the Man of Steel, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and so on. Batman, the Caped Crusader, the Dark Knight. Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man, my personal favorite. Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, go up and down the list. There's so many superheroes within our culture, and we export that out to the rest of the world. You go anywhere in a place that has TV or internet, and you ask them, who's Superman? They'll know who Superman is. Superman's been around for almost 100 years. And now, of course, every movie you can go to, it seems to be a superhero-themed movie as well. And every one of them makes $1 billion, so I don't expect it to stop anytime soon. The Marvel movies alone, they've put out over 24 movies at this point. So if you've seen them all, good for you. I haven't seen them all yet, but it's a work in progress. But film critic Adam Markovitz said, "We love to see a normal guy go from being just like us to somehow being better, faster, stronger. We project and we see ourselves on that screen. I'm one radioactive spider bite away from being the Amazing Spider-Man." Something like that. We project ourselves onto that. But that isn't a new thing. Not really. Not in human history or culture. It goes back to ancient lore. You go back to the Odyssey. You go back to stories of Achilles or Hercules in Greek mythology. That is basically what we're replicating today. In fact, it's a quote from director Christopher Nolan, who did the Batman movies. He says that superheroes fill a gap in the pop culture psyche similar to the role of Greek mythology, and there really isn't anything else that does the job in modern terms. So it allows us to take a break from us as we are, the common pedestrian man living a life of routine, to take a break and see ourselves on screen. What if that were me? What if that were me? And maybe that's a need in society. Maybe that's why we keep having things like that written about. But it certainly is part of it, and it goes back thousands of years. But those heroes, those are just make-believe, right? Nobody's really getting faster, stronger, smarter. We're basically more or less the same that we were 1,000 years ago. Sure, the technology is different. The gadgets are better. Maybe we could all be like Batman, who has no powers, if we just get the technology, or like Iron Man. But we're not actually changing as humans, right? We're the same. Or are we? I want to do something a little different today. I have 2 video clips to play that'll set the premise of my message. Each one's about 3 minutes, so sit back and relax. The first one I want to play is from Elon Musk. We know who he is. Certainly he's very famous and gets more so every day. But I want to play this video first, and then we'll talk about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the richest man in the world.
So the rate of improvement is really dramatic. We have to figure out some way to ensure that the advent of digital superintelligence is one which is symbiotic with humanity. I think that's the single biggest existential crisis that we face, and the most pressing one.
And how do we do that? I mean, if we take it that it's inevitable at this point, that some version of AI is coming down the line, how do we steer through that?
Well, I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I mean, I think one should generally err on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And so therefore, there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight on to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads by a lot.
That it's likely that we will merge somehow or another with this sort of technology and it'll augment what we are now? Or do you think it will replace us?
Well, that's the scenario. The merge scenario with AI is the one that seems like probably the best. Like
for us.
Yes. Like if you can't beat it, join it. That's
yeah.
You know. So from a long-term existential standpoint, that's like the purpose of Neuralink, is to create a high bandwidth interface to the brain such that we can be symbiotic with AI. Because we have a bandwidth problem. You just can't communicate through your fingers. It's too slow.
Instead of replacing us, it will radically change our capabilities.
Yes, it will enable anyone who wants to have superhuman cognition. Anyone who wants. This is not a matter of earning power, because your earning power would be vastly greater after you do it. So it's just like anyone who wants can just do it, in theory. That's the theory. And if that's the case, then, and let's say billions of people do it, then the outcome for humanity will be the sum of human will.
He's talking about the advent of artificial intelligence. His greatest fear is a digital superintelligence that is created that will eventually replace us as a species. He views it as an extinction-level event. And he's absolutely serious about this. This is the richest man in the world who spends his time launching rocket ships into space or building Teslas, but he stays awake at night worried that the robots that we inevitably will create will overtake us. And the only solution to saving our species is for us to become like them, to augment ourselves by putting chips in our brain to make it so that we are faster, better, that we have essentially a hive mind where everybody in this room with a Neuralink is thinking the same thoughts, our creativity exponentially grows, our intelligence exponentially expands. And this is what he realistically thinks is a path that he wants to build for the future. Now, he probably doesn't expect it to be in his own lifetime, but he thinks that for humanity to survive, we have to ascend to the next level. We have to become these super beings. And this is a concept that's come with the digital age. It's called transhumanism. And this is the modern belief that mankind can ascend past the physical limitations that we have of our strength, our speed, our intelligence, our lifespan. All of that needs to be broken so that we can become these godlike beings. And we essentially would establish through technology a new level of godhood. So there's a second video I want to show you. And this is from Dr. Yuval Noah Harari. He's a scientist and an historian. He's an advisor for something called the World Economic Forum, which essentially is a group that meets annually in Davos, Switzerland, and some of the most powerful, richest people, talking about ambassadors, politicians, world leader. Justin Trudeau is one of them, the Prime Minister of Canada. So he's got the ear of a lot of powerful people. And he talks in depth about this concept of human evolution, not the concept of Darwinian evolution, but the concept of evolution as in we need to make ourselves better. And not only should we can, and we must, and we will very soon. So let's play the second video. And before we do, I want to just apologize in advance. It can be a little offensive to hear, but I think it's important to set the mood for what I want to talk about. So go ahead and let's play the second video.
So, what will become of us? I think that we will become gods. We will acquire divine powers of creation and destruction, but we will be dissatisfied gods. We don't have to wait until Christ's second coming in order to overcome death. A couple of geeks in a laboratory can do it, if you give them enough time and money. I don't think life has any meaning. So in that sense, it's not a strong counter-argument. I know that many religions and philosophies have based the meaning of life on death and what happens after death, but I think these are all fictional stories that people have invented through history. Throughout history, death was kind of the great equalizer. I mean, the poor people always told themselves, say in the Middle Ages, yes, now these rich people, they have all the good things in life, but they will die in the end, at least that. Just think what it means to be a poor person in a world when you die, but the rich continue to live young and beautiful forever. I mean, that's a cause for a lot of anger. So in the first book of Genesis, what God does is to create animals and plants and humans. And we now want to gain this ability to ourselves to manufacture animals and plants and humans. And we even go beyond God. I mean, even if you believe in the Bible, the only thing the God of the Bible managed to create is organic beings. He managed to create the cows and the tomatoes and the giraffes and the humans, all organic. Now we try to go beyond the God of the Bible and create inorganic life, something he never managed to do, either according to the Bible or according to biology. For 4 billion years, all of life was organic, and now we want to create inorganic life. That's really, divinity is not far enough to describe what we are trying to do. If you read really the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, it's all about agricultural production. It's about rain, it's about pestilence, it's about fertility. And now we are much better than the God of the Bible. I mean, in the Bible you have these recurring droughts, that the people of Israel do something wrong, God's become angry, drought, no water. And now Israel has built, in recent years, a huge desalinization factory on the shores of the Mediterranean. And most drinking water in Israel today actually come from these plants, from these factories. So we can make God as angry as we like. I mean, he can stop the rains. We don't care. We still have water because science has managed to go way beyond the expectations of the ancient Hebrews.
When I first saw those videos, they are pretty shocking, the hubris that some people have. But then to realize he is in a position of great influence over many of the rich and powerful in the world, is this really what our world leaders, the rich and powerful, is this how they spend their time? Is this what they're thinking about? This idea that we're going to learn to solve death, and the first people who will live forever, of course us, the rich and powerful, not only that, will be young and beautiful forever, as he says. And they envision this world, this utopia that they're going to create by causing humanity to break the bonds of biology, to embrace a techno-transhumanism to allow us to evolve further. Now, the other thing I thought about when I first saw him speak is that these are not new concepts. The methods are new. Technology is new. But he's essentially saying that humans can become God. Man can be like God to the point where you don't need a God because we will be our own gods. And that is not a new idea of the 21st century. That is a lie that is as old as time itself. Please turn back to Genesis. Go back to the beginning. Go back to Genesis 3. And this is recorded in the Bible as the first lie that was given. Genesis 3 and verse 3. Start in verse 2. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, you shall not touch it, lest you die. Verse 4. And the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Not just knowing good and evil from the standpoint of God knows good and evil, but deciding what is good and evil, what is right. I can make that up for myself because I am my own God. So as he talks, it's almost like those are the words of the devil himself. Right? Though that is the fundamental lie that he told humanity at the beginning, that he's still telling humanity today, you don't need your creator because that is something that will hold you back. You can become everything you want to be. More powerful than Superman, smarter than Batman, and on and on and on. Those are the promises that they're talking about. And in their minds, that's not just a distant future. They think that is imminent. They see technological advancements happening at such a rate where exponential increases take place, potentially even within some of their own lifetimes, death will be solved by, as he put it, 2 geeks in a lab. And then all of a sudden, problem solved, we'll just go on and live forever. But that lie that Satan told Eve, it wasn't the first time that he told that lie. Let's go to Isaiah 14. Let's go to Isaiah 14, So Isaiah 14, and we will read verse 13. Isaiah 14:13. Let's start in verse 12. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I also will sit in the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. He told it to Eve as a lie because he told it to himself first. He believed it his own idea from the beginning that he himself could replace God. And that is the very fundamental lie that he is still living under the illusion of. That he will be victorious, that he will replace God, and that in the end he will stop anything that would prevent that. God is not powerful enough to stop him. And even if he is, he's going to take us with him, believing the same lie that ultimately will lead to our destruction. So that's not a new concept. But to see it talked about openly like that. And they have forums like that where they just sit for hours and talk about this kind of thing. It's all publicly available. Most people haven't taken the time to notice it because it's, who wants to watch something called the World Economic Forum, right? But to see Elon Musk talk that way, for all the things that he's into that are pretty cool, it's a scary thought that here's this man who's a self-proclaimed atheist thinking he's going to be the savior of mankind by modifying us so that we can survive. So this is how mankind talks. How does mankind view Godhood? Let's say that they achieve all of their goals and they become these enlightened beings. The Godhood they have is not one that we're familiar with. It's one that is based on power over others, the ability to create but also to destroy whenever they want. Perhaps they can be benevolent. Perhaps they won't be. It's really up to them. There's no set in stone idea of what is good and what is evil. It's our decision. We will live forever. And the greatest fear that they have, which is death, they will overcome. So that's the idea of mankind's view of Godhood that they want to attain. But I want to talk about how you actually can be like God for a few minutes. Now, Jesus Christ was the Word. He came to earth to dwell as a man. He didn't come in the way that many thought he would, with a triumphant return or an entrance and taking over the country of Rome and establishing a nation of Israel again. That's not the way it happened. He came as a humble man, and he came teaching us to also likewise be humble. He taught us to love our enemy, to do good to those who hate you, to show mercy, compassion. Those aren't anything that we've heard from what their idea of what Godhood is, but that's what he came and he showed us. Turn to Matthew 22. He summed up the entire concept of what he was teaching in a couple of commandments. Matthew 22 and verse 36. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? This is verse 36. Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all of the prophets. This is not anything like that we're hearing from people today. Science does not have anything like this. They will scoff at the idea that there's any kind of meaning of life or there's any kind of way you ought to live other than one that just equally can benefit humanity from their perspective. Their quest for Godhood is quite different than the one that's described here and the one that Jesus is offering us. Because what he tells us is considered to be weak. It's considered weakness to submit yourself. It's considered weakness to be on your knees rather than standing up on your own. Because the way that we see it, when we're at our weakest, that's when we're at our strongest. Because it isn't our strength we rely on. It isn't our augmentation that makes us better. It's the strength of God. It's the faith of God. It's the power of God that sustains us. We claim his strength so that we can have it in our lives and rely on him. Jesus also tells us that whoever wishes to be first, let him make himself last. It's a completely opposite view of the things that we're hearing in today's society, and certainly within those videos. Because nothing what you see in those videos relates to biblical teaching at all. Because the way of God is foreign to man. For there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. That's in Proverbs 14:12. So, the biblical definition of what it is to achieve a Godhood is one of love, compassion, mercy, things like that. Things that we all try to accomplish, but we fall short of because we're not capable of loving as perfectly as God does. But where does all of this that we see, where does all of that lead? Where are they taking us when they talk like this? Will technology reshape the world as we know it? Probably. Does the end of the age one of a techno-organic hybrid that takes place where there are these super beings walking around before the return of Christ? I can't say that's a fact. Are we robotic computers at the time Christ returns where we all have cyborg implants? I doubt that's the case. Have we been conquered by robots like many movies show? And then when Jesus returns, he's actually saving us from these mechanical monstrosities we created. I very much doubt that's the case. But these are thoughts you can have about technology, because so much of technology is unknown about where we're going. Now, I'm a computer programmer. I'm familiar with some of these concepts that they have, this idea of machine learning, where you tell a machine a task and say, go out and create an image of a person's face. And all you have are these rules, loose rules, on what a person's face should be. The computer now will replicate, and they'll just spit out face after face after face, like it's nothing, looking completely exact like a person, but they don't actually exist. There's a site called thispersondoesnotexist.com. You just go there, keep refreshing. Every time you do, it's a brand new face of a person who doesn't exist. But the computer tells us it does. And it's leading us down this path where in a few years, you're not going to be able to believe anything your eyes see, as everything's a deep fake or everything's some kind of a hoax that takes place, because machines are so good at fooling us that we get fooled so often. So you won't be able to believe your ears, your eyes, or your mind, and all you have is just this wandering in the dark mentality. So that's a possibility. But I think we're very far away from the world that they see. But more importantly is this idea that they need that in order to be complete. Right? They feel, as we probably do, there's something missing in our lives, something that they don't have. And they think it's the ability to create and destroy and live forever. And we feel similar in one sense, because we feel something's missing apart from God, like there would be a hole in our lives. There's seemingly a hole in everybody's life apart from their Creator. I think that's clear in our lives, but it's also clear in what the Bible tells us, is that without that connection to where you're from, your Creator, and the power of God in your life, you're not going to be complete. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe they're looking for that meaning or purpose that they say doesn't exist. Maybe they're trying to create their own purpose. But getting back to what Dr. Harari says specifically, he speaks of this bold new age of ascent of mankind into godhood, away from the prison of religions of the past. And it's built purely on human secularism. It's built purely on human will. But is that really the world that we see described in the Bible at the end time? So now I want to think about that. We've talked about what they're trying to do. Will they be successful? What does the Bible say about the end times? Is it one of a purely secularized world where a bunch of atheists control the earth? And I don't think that's the case. I think if you look at prophecy, you look at the end time scenario, it is a world that is awash greatly in religious deception, as if a religious fervor has taken over the entire world to a level that perhaps we've never seen, certainly not in modern times. It isn't this idea that we live apart from a God. It's that there is a man who's claiming to be like God, right? There is an end-time false prophet who can perform miracles in front of people. There's a scripture I'm not going to turn to, but it's in Revelation 13, verse 11. It talks about a beast that can call down fire from heaven anytime he wants, in sight of all the people. That's a miracle. That's something we've never seen. That isn't something that science is going to give him. So with a concept like that, I generally think of the end time as one that kind of returns back to its religious foundations we've seen in history, but it's one that is fervently anti-Christianity in terms of how we view it. And so that, I mean, to me, that's just my thought on it, and perhaps we need to keep that in mind, because I don't see a massive secular wave. It's more likely to me that there's going to be a series of events that cause us to look to heaven for help, right? A series of terrible events that happen, as described in the Bible. And when you're at your lowest point, all of a sudden the arrogance, the hubris, it goes away, and you're replaced with this idea that you need help from on high. So I wouldn't be surprised if a man like Dr. Harari, with all of his venom and hatred for things in the Bible, that once he sees a miracle before him, something he can't explain, something supernatural that's not of this world, once he sees that, he might very well be one of the first in line to worship a beast power. So it's amazing what pride comes before the fall. So let's all keep that in mind. But there's another one that I saw of Elon Musk himself, who says that he's not a religious man. He doesn't believe in the Bible. But I was watching a documentary about his SpaceX flight. There's a scene in there where they launch astronauts into space for the first time. And he tells us that that moment, the night before, he was so worried about, because he'd never done it with actual human life at risk. He was so worried about the test pilots. He stayed up all night, and he said he actually prayed. He prayed to God that they would be safe. Here's a man who, in every sense, denies seemingly God and things of the Bible, but when he was at his lowest point, he was his most worried, he will openly tell you he prayed. So to me, that kind of thing can happen to the whole world, where the world is just set in terror. All of a sudden, you might realize how faithful you are when you see miracles and things like that. So that's a thought I have. But the fundamental thing I want to leave you with today, as I talk about, is that the great irony is that they're trying to create a pathway to Godhood, a pathway to be like God. The reality, though, is God already has that pathway for mankind, and he's giving it to us today. It isn't one where we embrace this techno-digital artificial intelligence that will give us powers. It's one where we submit ourselves to God, we humble ourselves before our Creator, we understand his truth, we obey his commands, and then that allows us the path to be like him, to ascend from our physical forms into something more like God. So it's funny that, in a way, we're both on the same path. Us here in this room want to be like God. He wants to be like a God. But he's taking the way that Satan is offering, and we're trying to take the way that God is offering. Please turn to 1 Corinthians 15. And this is exactly, it seems, what they're looking for. This is one of the promises that God gives to those who are faithful at the return of Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 51. 1 Corinthians 15:51. This is commonly referred to as the resurrection chapter. It says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality." It's essentially what they're looking for. They don't realize that's what they're looking for, but that's what it is, to live forever in a world without pain, without suffering, where you don't have to worry about limitations. That's the world they want. The problem they have is that you have to submit to your Creator to get there. And that's what Satan refused to do. And that's what they tell us they're refusing to do. And hopefully they won't. Hopefully when they learn of God's truth, they'll realize the need they have for him. But the path that Satan has set himself on, the path that Satan has set all of humanity on, it is one that ultimately leads to destruction without repentance. But the path to God, the family of God, is laid out before us. And that's the one that we need to be focused on. So the perfect world that comes about, it isn't because of humanity's efforts. It's not because of humanity's ability to break beyond the physical limitations we have, to overcome our bandwidth, as Elon Musk put it, our ability to communicate faster. We don't start computing our minds faster. Instead, it is because God will break the spiritual limitations of the human heart. In Jeremiah 31, verse 33, God tells us that he will write his law on their very hearts. So we're going to get a software upgrade, but it isn't the one that we create. It's the one that God gives us that transforms the heart of a human to one that can actually be submissive to God, and then we'll be incredibly happy after that happens. Because what they're fighting against is actually what will make them the most complete. And someday they'll understand that. But we understand that now, and the path that we want to walk is not the one chasing after some digital super being. It isn't something that we can inject into our bodies to make us better. It's something that we need to work on within inside of us, within our heart. That's what we have to change. That's what we have to transform. And that's what we need to focus on. So I want you to keep these things in mind as we progress towards the fall holy days, as the plan of God will be laid out within those days. It starts with the return of Jesus Christ. That is our day of victory for those who are faithful. That is the day you receive the promises written here in 1 Corinthians 15. And that's the day that we need to keep in mind. Not get distracted by promises of human upgrades that can save us or make us better. Whatever mankind accomplishes will ultimately come to nothing. Because even if you become the greatest of all humans, you're still nothing more than an ant to God. You may be the most powerful of all the ants, but you're still just an ant. So we know where our faith lies. We know where truth lies. And the kingdom of God is something that we need to also keep in mind and embrace. Because the return of Christ is just the beginning. It's the beginning of a very sad story of human suffering, the end of human suffering, but it's the beginning of a brand new age. In a place where there is probably technology, perhaps technology greater than we could ever imagine for the humans that still exist at that time. But it will only be used for goodness. It will no longer be used for our own selfish ambition or to make ourselves into gods. And then also, when Satan is put away, finally, it'll be the end of the great lie that he's been telling mankind and himself for millennia. So the fate of humanity will not be us conquered by an artificial super intelligence that we created. It also won't be us figuring out how to cheat death and live forever. But instead it will be God returning and bringing us into his family, each and every one of us, in any way that he can and sees fit. As long as we're willing, as long as we're humble before him, and ultimately we will ascend past this physical limitations that we have into one that is spiritual and one that is part of the family of God. Everybody have a happy Sabbath.